glad you're joining us tonight. And as we always do, especially if you're joining for the first time, we really do encourage folks. I know it can be kind of intimidating to, respond on a chat, especially if you're not familiar with the channel, you've never been here before. But we can assure you, we don't do this to try and embarrass people or put people on the spots, but really just to open some dialogue and give people opportunities to ask questions in maybe a little bit more of a, for lack of a better term, like a protected environment. You're not out in the open. Nobody's looking at your face. You don't have to, you can type things in there. I mean, the truth is we get some people in here that are far too bold, and they put things in there that have to be either censored or deleted. But, hopefully we're all adults tonight, so we encourage you to be bold. Tonight's topic is for me an interesting one. Pastor Ford laughed at my title when he first saw it, but the title is very simple. It's just how to make good on stress. And I was thinking about doing this, something on stress anyway, but then I was listening to a podcast and somebody made a comment about this issue of stress, and so I got a little bit more inspired and thoughts kind of rolled a little bit, and he was talking about how we have built our lives on the pursuit of comfort and convenience, and so he was talking about how we were actually, he was talking more in the sense of like we've evolved to handle stress, but we were, in fact, made to be able to handle an amount of stress, right? And so the human makeup is built to handle and process stress correctly. And that's kind of going to be the baseline for where we go in this whole podcast, is that there are right ways to handle stress and there are wrong ways to handle stress. But avoiding stress clearly is not beneficial to anybody. And an example I could give of that, just in way of an illustration or an intro, is that apparently, when we're on Earth, we are governed by certain laws, and one of those laws obviously is gravity, and we clearly are able to stand on the ground and we're not floating in the air because of gravity. And what's interesting about gravity is gravity actually is a form of stress. It's an amount of, essentially it's weight or force that's pushing down on your body, and if you jump up in the air and flatten your body out, gravity will introduce you to the concrete. And so there's an interesting phenomenon that happens when astronauts are in space for an extended amount of time. When they come back to Earth, there are some instances where astronauts can't even do things simply like walk. They have trouble walking. They actually are sometimes bedridden for a number of hours or days before they can actually get up and start walking, because their body is no longer used to the stress of gravity. And so the reason why that's an interesting illustration is because our bodies are used to gravity, but when you remove the stress for too long, your body no longer knows how to handle it. It adapts to the ease and comfort of a lack of gravity. And so I have some audience questions. I'm sorry if I didn't pull up the stream here, but to try and get our minds moving in the right direction, one of the questions I wanted to ask was, what are some, we'll call them major forms of stress? And we'll just see what. I almost feel like major's too much. I don't want this to be an extreme answer. So anybody that answers here, you don't have to give me some extreme thing of stress, but just we'll call it, okay, how about instead of major, we'll just call them regular forms of stress. And then I'm going to
how about, I was going to say sources of stress.
Okay, sources. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, because they're external. That's better. Although the source could be your own way of thinking.
Yeah, and don't, my husband, my wife, don't put that in.
No, please do it. We can see.
Yeah, that will be.
That'll take the podcast in the wrong direction. Having a marriage counseling session. Okay, so in way of a question to try and kick off, at least send us in a direction. There are a lot of
Oh, I'm on. Oops.
you never can tell. It's funny because I can't even see that, so I have to
Yeah.
be really careful about what I do over here. Because you're usually the one on the screen because you're talking the most. But okay, so how would you categorize? We'll call it necessary stress. Things that you need to be able to handle in order to function properly. I mentioned gravity. Gravity is just a good example of stress that you really can't avoid it if you live on Earth.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. So I think that's the way that I would. That was the thought that came into my mind when you talked about that you stress that's necessary. That idea is that there are things that are unavoidable sources of stress. You can't do anything about them. Like what you mentioned, but that doesn't make those things. Those kinds of sources we're created to be able to handle those. So there are stresses that gravity's not the only one. There are other things that you have to that are sources of stress that are necessary, and you have to you have to go through. But there are sources of stress, and I'm not sure what we want to do tonight, where you're going with this. But the idea there are sources of stress that are not necessary. They can be, and those need to be dealt with. They need to be So that's I think an important.
So that was going to be a follow-up
Yeah.
question. So we can actually go right into that.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
pertinent to stick on the one because if you learn the one, obviously you can start making sense of the other. But
Yeah.
I think that there are some examples of things that I was thinking about things that we process mentally, things that we think about mentally. So things like
Yeah.
like the past, dwelling too much on things that have happened.
Well, so those are the things that are not necessary.
Right,
So those are the things. So like financial stress, those kinds of things. Those are things that, they are realities. That there are there's pressure there, but they're like well, they're reality. Which I would categorize gravity in that same category. That there are things that they're just reality. Are things you have to deal with. They're not. It's dealing. I think the real issue is being able to learn how to deal with stressors correctly.
Yeah. So we've actually done a whole podcast on stressors, life stressors before.
Yeah.
But thinking about like how to properly, like deal with stress, and let's think about it from because it's a reality. Talking about things in the past, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are realities, but
No, they were realities.
okay, that's
Yeah, there's a
okay. So now
difference.
we're answering the question of how to handle them properly,
Right. Yeah.
So
Yes.
so give me some more context on that, because we're there. I mean, clearly there are things
For the past in particular?
Yeah,
Oh,
specifically.
okay.
So like I was thinking about there have been it doesn't really happen. I'll be honest, it doesn't happen a lot lately. Now that I'm thinking about it, right this second. But I'd mentioned on the podcast before that there were moments within the first few years of me being free from addiction, where I would be laying in bed, and it's usually when I was laying in bed or laying on the couch or something like that, and I would feel my body would go to a certain temperature, so the air was a certain temperature, and I was kind of like halfway between sleep and awake, and I remember. I would remember that feeling of going through withdrawals. It was a really bizarre kind of experience, and I would feel
Well, that's a
level of anxiety.
that's a weird place to be. I think that's a place that's I call it night terrors, and it's a similar type of thing. But it's a place of vulnerability because you're not dealing with reality 100%,
Right.
and it's a vulnerability. It's a place of vulnerability.
Explain more. Because clearly,
Yeah.
there
Well,
are-
it's not a stress thing,
No,
but
no,
the
no, no.
idea.
Yeah. So now,
The idea because you're not quite asleep and you're not quite awake, and so you're not your thoughts are still wandering, and things are still, your senses are a little misinformed.
okay. So
You know, so
you're not thinking.
yeah,
It's almost like
you're in a
dream
state. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what
Okay.
I mean is you're in
Yeah.
a you're not quite awake, but you're not quite asleep, and so yeah, you're going to have thoughts in your mind that are sleep thoughts,
Mhm.
but you are conscious, that you're having these thoughts, and so but they're not the same kinds of thoughts that you have when you're
So
fully
is
awake.
that different from someone who essentially their emotions and ability to interact with other people is now limited by things that have happened in the past? Is that different?
That's not because what we're talking about. I mean, you could find similarities between the two states because they're both dealing with a lack of reality, but the other one is you just have to be more. The
To,
more I think about it, the less I want to draw strong distinctions between the two because they are similar in a lot of ways. Because you're talking about things not thinking correctly, and so when you start just looking at it at a more general things, not thinking correctly about things.
but we are talking about things becoming stressors that shouldn't be, right?
Okay, yeah. So to kind of unravel this a little bit, so we don't get too caught up on the idea of dream state, thing, is there's two things that you can't control. You can't control your past and you can't control your future. All you have is your present, and Jesus makes that very clear. He specifically says, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will take care of itself. Worry sufficient are the issues of the day," and you can't do anything about the past. The past is already behind you. So we're going. I'm trying to keep from going off on a tangent in talking about stress because the past, understanding that the past has caused consequences that are irreversible, and you just have to deal with those things. But that's true about everybody. I mean, everybody has past experiences that have affect their present situation, but you have to understand that there's nothing you can do in order to you can't change the past, but you can change the present. And so I'm just thinking, from the standpoint of consequences, because there are times in life where you disqualify yourself permanently from things. Like when you have so if you, you are out, and you're sleeping with a boyfriend or girlfriend, and the girlfriend gets pregnant, and it's now irreversible. You can never be a non-pregnant person. You're no longer not a mother or a father, for that matter. You can pretend, you can avoid, and of course we know that there are surgical procedures that can be done to try to cover up. But the reality is you can never go back to that place of where you aren't for lack of a better way of describing it, is the innocence. There's not that innocence, it's gone. But so in your presence, you accept that as reality. You don't try to pretend it never happened and live in some sort of weird,
Yeah.
denial
Yeah.
of it. And so you're disqualified from that innocence. That's what I mean when I say it that way. But in your present, everybody has lots of things that are the consequences of their past.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to move on from that and not allow your past to dominate your present. And so whatever complexities are there are part of your present. But you have to still deal with your present without regret or denial or any of those kinds of things. You have to put it in there. Okay, this happened, this really happened, this is where things are, and now this is the result of those things. And sometimes they can be very terrible things. They can be very terrible things that you have done, and you may not have done it in a full cognizance, but looking back on it now, you think that was a horrible thing to do as a human. You have to accept that. You have to accept that, and you have to accept the limitations that puts on your life, especially from what's the word I want to use, a reputation perspective. There's things I was thinking about. This specific thing is that the people that I know that have done that, they've covered up their past, and then it's come out, and has destroyed their present, because they did not accept that limitation that experience brought. And so because of that, they went into denial or to hide it, and oh no, it's okay. And Christians do this. It's a bad idea for Christians to do this. Is that because we've been forgiven of a thing, it's as if it never happened, and that's not.
Yeah.
It's not the case. That whole idea, justified, just if I never sinned, is what is the kind of way that people think about it. That you can only take that so far, because it's not entirely like that, because your reputation is still the same. Like, for example, if you did 40 years in prison for murder, and now you're a Christian, don't expect people to act like you never murdered somebody. Don't expect that. You should understand that you murdered somebody. This is going to be with you the rest of your life. Own it. And any limitation that it might put on your life, well, you have to deal with that. You have to live with that, because you have to live in the present reality. You can't live in a present fantasy. And if you're going to truly be free from your past, and your past isn't going to be a source of stress, then you have to accept it for what it is and let that be a part of who you are. And if that doesn't fit, like, for example, if you're you want to become a Sunday school teacher, and you murdered somebody, that may not work.
Yeah.
That may not work. It may not be the place for you. But why should you feel the need to have to do that? If you're, maybe the church that you go to, or the parents are like, no, I'm not comfortable with my kids being taught by a murderer. It's like, well, hey, fine.
Yeah.
That I'll own that. I'll own that, rather than getting into this all uppity, attitude kind of a thing, because that's dealing with, a stressful situation.
Yeah.
You don't have to. It's not a requirement. This idea, that there are certain things that we must do. That now that we're Christians, I have to be a pastor, or I have to be a Sunday school teacher, or I have to be in this ministry. I have to, because it's God's will for my life. Well, that's not biblical, by any stretch of the imagination to say that, you when Paul says, woe unto me if I don't preach, it's because he's qualified to preach, And so because he's qualified to preach, you say, well, he murdered people and did this and that and the other thing. And that was part of his testimony, and it flowed with his ministry. And that's the point that I'm making, is if it doesn't, it doesn't. If that's all there is to it. Don't try to like I said, live in denial. And so it's the reason why this is so fresh on my mind is because I know a particular case where this has been the case, and looking backwards, and thinking, of a very similar case. It's a case right now. There's an individual who wanted a pastor, had done something in his past that disqualified him, and decided he's going to go find a fellowship that allows for him to continue to do that. And I thought, that's a bad idea. That's a bad idea for you to try to find a church that allows you to do the thing that you want to do when you have already run into a brick wall somewhere else. It's a bad thing to do, because others have done that, and they're prominent, world-renowned preachers who have done that very thing, and then it came back on them big time. because they were able to hide it. They were able
Yeah.
to keep it away for years of 40, 50, 60 years. They were able to keep it away and nobody found out about it. But here, now towards the last lapse, of their lives, and then it comes out, and it's a big, you know, drama, affecting hundreds of people's lives. People having to make choices. Are they gonna side with this guy and grace, 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 or is it no? There's judgment. There's a reality of judging things. And so why do you want to invite trouble into your life? I like the way that the scripture talks about it. It's like grabbing a dog by the ears. You're asking for trouble. You are just asking for trouble by tangling, with a questionable reality, in your life. And so handling that properly is very important. And so it could, because you still have a future. The future may not be what you were hoping it would be because you've been disqualified by your past. But what you're living in the present, at the end of the day, if you're going to do it properly, it has to be within the boundaries of understanding those things.
So it's interesting, you're because there was some purpose to asking the questions the way I was asking it, but stress is an interesting thing to kind of study out, just like the definition of stress and like what stress produces and what it can cause, and how it can be, how you can actually take advantage of it. There are a lot of things you could look into, but stress itself is actually the human response to life and the pressures of life. It's not actually a thing that stress itself is not external, it's always internal. And so when we're, if you look at, I've looked up a few different definitions from different sources, but it's a physical, mental, or emotional response to external or internal pressure or demands.
Right.
And it is a natural reaction to situations that require adaptation or action.
Right.
And so everything you're talking about is like these different situations, whether it's being in a dream state or something horrible that's happened to you in your past, or something in your past that's come back to bite you.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the human response is what determines whether it becomes stress or something else, or whether that stress leads
stress
to
or not stress.
Yeah, stress or not stress, right? And so it's interesting because if you think about I was thinking about this in terms of like a guitar string, right? You tune a guitar, you put an amount of pressure on a guitar string, right? Then you're actually putting tensile pressure on a string, and if you pressure it to the right point, it makes a beautiful tune.
Right.
If you over pressure it doesn't make a good tune at all, or it breaks. Right. And so everything has like this ability to handle an amount of pressure and function well.
Yes.
But at the same time, something can overstress a string, or too much pressure can overstress it, and it ends up breaking and not being able to function at all.
Yeah, and I think bringing that analogy into human existence is, we're the ones, doing,
tuner.
We're not the string.
Yeah.
We like to think, we are the string, as far as whether it's going to snap or not, but the issue is we're the ones controlling,
right.
the tension.
So thinking in that context then, so I want to actually get to some of these. We got one. So I want to ask a question again. A few folks have kind of trickled in, but the question I put in on the chat, and maybe you don't have the chat, just open out in a browser or anything like that, but if you can answer in your chat, we'd really appreciate the answers. The question is, what are some regular sources of stress, or we could actually probably call them better causes of stress, but the first one that came in is deadlines or things that need to be done by a certain date or time. And I was just thinking about this in the context of how to kind of respond to the answers that come in. Is, from your experience, what would you say are some things, or some, not responses, but results of stress that are negative and or lead to something positive when it comes to stuff like this? So we have kind of two outcomes, right, in each one of these. So deadlines are an amount of pressure. That's pressure, right? Yeah. They're a source that can cause stress.
Right.
How do you take the pressure of deadlines, because I'm only using that because that's the first example that came in, how do you take that and give me, kind of an example of both directions? One, it goes in a positive direction. It's not something that stresses you out, but
Yeah.
it gears you in a direction, or it turns into stress.
Yeah.
And I mean, by the way, stress has a ridiculous hormonal response. It's fantastic to look into, and for time's sake, you can't really go into it in the podcast. But
Yeah.
but too much stress in the human
Yeah,
body is not
yeah,
great.
Yeah. Well, that's the that what you're referring to there, and that's going to be the kind of the pattern for all of these kinds of things, is accepting the fact that the reality is that life, there are deadlines. But another element of that understanding that there are deadlines is that because there are deadlines, you need to be careful of how many things you commit yourself to.
Yeah.
In order to make sure that you can meet those deadlines. And so that's so you have to balance that. You can't. There's.
I guess you're almost
think there was
providing tools here.
I think there was a book there that had something to do with this about learning how to say no. And that the idea. I was trying to remember, but I mean there are a lot of books that I've read that have talked about that kind of idea of learning how to be able to say no. No, I have too much on my plate. I can't commit to this. And so your deadlines need to be realistic. You need to look at them from the standpoint of reality. And something that I always, especially as a pastor, that I'm constantly, people will call me, I need to talk to you right now. And it's like, about what? And I can't talk to you. I need to talk to you right now. And it's like, huh?
Boundaries, the book.
Yeah. And so I say, okay, well, I need to know a little bit about the idea here, because if this is just you're upset at the moment, number one, I don't want people to get in the habit of calling me every time they're upset at the moment, because there's no way I can facilitate, being able to help people, every time they're upset. In the moment. And so I want to know what it is. And if they can't tell me, then no, I just need to talk to you about it. Okay, fine. Well, talk to me at church, talk to me at this point, talk to me at that point. I will put it off to some other point. Oh, no, I need to talk to you about it right now. Well, if you don't know how to tell me about it in a summary, then you haven't really defined a problem yet. We need to, what is the problem? Let's start there. My husband, my wife. Okay, right. Well, let's talk at church on Wednesday. No, I need to deal with it right now. No, you don't. You don't need to deal with it right now. You need to be a grown up. And unless and if you're calling me because your husband or wife has a knife to your throat, you've dialed the wrong number. You should have dialed 911. You shouldn't have dialed pastor. So if this is a life-threatening emergency, you need to call people that are qualified to handle life-threatening emergencies.
You just have that as like a tag at the end of your answering message, your greeting.
Yeah.
If this is
if this is life-threatening, please dial 911. But so the idea, and what I'm putting out there is in my area, in dealing with people, a lot of, with people, is understanding. People need to understand, and you don't, you're going to cause yourself a heck of a lot of stress by embracing other people's stress. And so, and you're not doing them any favors, if somebody's house is on fire and they're stuck inside, you running inside and sitting down on the couch with them, that doesn't help them. They're no better off than before you came in. If you can't get in there and pull them out of the fire, there's no point in going into the fire. You're just what to tell, so other people can see what a great guy you are. You're only gonna be able to do that a couple of times, and eventually you're gonna burn in the fire. You're better off to be able to rescue a few people, by finding ways to maneuver in and get them out of the house, than you are people who are like, no, I'm not leaving this room. I'm not coming out. I'm not doing anything. You come and find me and save me. Well, that would mean losing my life as well. So I'm afraid this one's not going to work. And there's just a reality with this stuff. When you're dealing with life issues, you need to understand that everyone has limitations. and we're not superhuman. And so, managing deadlines, managing, those kinds of things, are you can get a lot more done. The old saying, an emergency, poor planning on your part doesn't result in an emergency on my part. And I don't work on an emergency priority system. If somebody calls me and they have an emergency, well, I don't have an emergency. I'm just fine. And I don't have to go into emergency mode. I'm not a firefighter. I'm not, that's not the job of a pastor. And there are times where people genuinely need, help, and, so a family member's been rushed to the hospital. Well, you've called, the ambulance, or you've taken them to the hospital. They've seen the doctor. They've been, taken care of. All the things that need to be done are done. Well, then you can call me, because you've done all the right things. You want some help, some moral support, prayer, okay, yeah, that's fine, because it's a life-threatening situation, but you've gone through the right channels to get to, the person. You start calling people, to help you after you've called the professionals. And so it's managing, you're managing these things. You have to manage them. That's the key. And so things like deadlines, you have to manage them. You don't, when somebody comes in and says, I need this by 2:00 this afternoon, and you have another thing that you need to get done by 4, then you need to say, I can't get this done by 2. I have to get this done by 4. Unless you want to move that out, then I can't do this, And so, if you want to reprioritize, that's fine. But everything needs to be done like that.
Yeah.
If you're gonna reduce the impact of stressors in your life, you have to think like that.
So this is kind of a random but relevant question. Do you think, and I'm asking you as a pastor, and mentioned this before, but I think you've seen a lot of people at their worst, and in a lot of really messed up situations. Do you think that, in your observation, stress addiction is a thing?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There are people who are addicted to cortisol. Absolutely addicted to cortisol. And cortisol is a very bad drug. Very, very bad drug. It's not good for your body at all. It's good in small quantities, yeah, because of the numbness that it brings. You use that for, when you have various surface pain, it helps to do that. Was that book on running, the barefoot running guy. I can't remember his name. Born to Run. Yeah, it talks about how, he's having problems with his legs, and he was living off of cortisol shots because it was the only way he could keep the pain down, but it wasn't obviously a healthy situation. And that's, you do that, you can do that to yourself, where you just get all, you become a junkie for the numbness, And yes, I do believe. I was going to actually mention, my wife was telling me a story of a friend of hers that she's known for years, and she used to work with her, and she was almost in tears because she says she's making all these dumb decisions, she's ruining her life, and it doesn't have to be the case. And I thought, man, if I did that, I would be a wreck, because there's so many people that I talk to, and she doesn't even know probably 90% of the drama, of things that I have to deal with people, because I purposely don't talk about it, because it's like, it just makes me sound cold-hearted, by talking about it so ho-hum. It's like people who work in, emergency services, and they go, oh yeah, we had 3 deaths today, it's like, ho-hum, it's like, oh well. But it's not. It's because, they've had, they see death every day, and so it's like a part of their lives now. And there's a level of
less of a shock factor.
Yeah, they realize, hey, this is it. It's not good. It's not fun, but it's reality.
Yeah.
That's their reality.
Yeah.
And that's the way you cope with that kind of reality.
Yeah.
Is you can't, again, you're adapting to a stressful situation. And so, but as she's explaining, my wife's explaining to me about this issue, I'm thinking, why are you upset? I mean, it's just like, she's making these decisions, and I'm thinking in my mind, she can't be doing those, she can't be making those decisions ignorantly. And she can't, after so many years of doing this, putting, well, I won't go into the details of it, but it's just, just doing certain things. And it's like, so you don't see anything wrong with doing that. It's like, I did this, but I covered it up so nobody knows I'm doing it. And then that way, I'm a good person because I'm only ruining myself and not other people as well. And it's like, but you can't see the problem with that, so now that helped, so somebody like that, when they're ready to respond, in a positive way to instruction and correction, I can help them.
Yeah.
Because I can think about them clearly. I can think, well, why are they, they've got to be thinking like this. They've got to be doing that. There's got to be this kind of thing going on. I can think very soberly about it rather than having this sort of emotional, oh my God, why don't they start making right choices? I'm thinking, why? I know why they're not making right choices,
Yeah.
And there's nothing I can do about that, at this stage of the game. But I will be able to identify when they're ready, to change because of certain choices. I had my son-in-law, Anthony, I had a situation like that where he's just running on hot steam emotion and saying all kinds of stuff, and making all kinds of claims that are unreasonable. And I'm, because I'm in Dave mode, I won't call it pastor mode because it's not pastor mode. It's just become my life. Is that I'm just listening and processing and thinking, oh, he's, really out there. Hopefully he'll run out of steam so I can help him. But if he doesn't run out of steam, this is going to cause trouble in his life. He's going to be damaged, but there's going to be damaging consequences for these decisions that he's threatening to make. And then he just says, listen, this is, and, really came clean about some things that he was dealing with in his own self. And immediately I told him, I said, now I can help you. So now I can help you. I needed you to do that. I needed you to just be honest with where you are, the reality of where you are. Now I can help you. And that a lot of the issue of stress in life is just simply dealing with reality. Dealing with it in an honest way, things that you can't, I think about it a lot, and it's a fabulous theology, the serenity prayer, I don't remember the details of it, but the idea is, help me to have the courage to change the things that need to be changed, and the patience or humility.
Yeah.
To accept the things that I cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
And those are three factors that are so critical to life. Is that change the things that you can change. It may be painful, but change the things you can change. Accept the things that you can't change. It's just deal with it. It's just reality. And then, the wisdom to be able to tell the difference, because things that you don't think you can change, you may be able to, and things that you can't change, maybe you think you can. And so that's a very critical element. But those are the main reasons why people struggle so much in life, is that they want to change things that they can't, or they don't feel like they can change things they can't. And being able to work all that out is, they talk about, it's not so much stress. It is stress reduction. I mean, it's the actual definition of stress reduction, but it's more than just stress reduction. It's stress elimination. You're literally eliminating it from becoming stress in your life. I find it very interesting that I can be caught up in something and be all vexed about something. I'm working on something and things aren't working out very well. And if I can tear myself away long enough to go out into the garage and put on a video and work out, now I've got a whole different kind of stress going on, and I'm not thinking about that other stress. And then after I'm done, both of those stresses have been reduced.
Yeah.
Not just the one. But both of them have, because I've finished the workout, so it's like, I'm done. I made it. So there's that pleasure of being done with one stress. And the fact that I haven't been thinking about that other stress for an hour, that other stress is now calmed down as well. and I don't know if this is just lesson time for me or what, but the number of things that now I finally started, I wasn't like this. I stay with it until you finish it kind of attitude. It doesn't matter, what at what cost. That not only that I'm not doing it at what cost, but it's a minimal cost. If I see that there's any kind of cost at all, to some of these things, like, no, I'm not paying it. I'm sorry, I'm not paying it. It goes in the trash, or I put it on hold, work on it some other day, and I'm amazed at the number of times that I've done that in the last several weeks, where I finally just said, no, I'm not doing this way. That all of a sudden, an easier way shows up. I've been, it's not too relevant, but another computer problem. I've been for 2 days almost solid, trying to get Bluetooth to work on my computer, and I thought, oh, screw it, I'm done with it. Turn it off, and I'm done with it. I don't need the computer. It's not one that I regularly work with. It's one that I use here in the church office, which I very, very, very rarely use. Forget it. Just forget it. And so I had tried a few things, they weren't working, and so I thought, and I got some suggestions to try. So I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then turned it off. I said, went to reboot it. I thought, no, you know what? Not reboot, shut off. And I shut it off and I went to bed. And I thought, oh, I'll worry about it some other day. And then I got up and came in here today. Came in a little bit early to try to have another shot at it, but actually had a plan B. With another device that's not a Bluetooth device. But so I come in, turn it on. What Bluetooth problem? Works fine. Absolutely fine. Click search, found my mouse, found my keyboard, everything worked. And it's like, okay. And that's happened probably 4 or 5 times, in the last 2 or 3 weeks and it's like, I don't know if this is like lesson learning time or what. I'm just realizing, don't try to bang everything out, to success all the time. You don't have to. I'm not setting a record,
Yeah. So it's interesting that you're sharing these examples. So you'd mentioned cortisol being a horrible drug. It's actually, and I know what you're saying. Clearly, it's the idea of being addicted to it is clearly not a great idea.
Oh, it's not good for you.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, on the contrary, it's very good for you in the right amount.
Yes.
And so what's interesting,
yes, but that's the problem.
So now here
that so is ibuprofen. But
no.
You take a handful of ibuprofen, every day, and then tell me how beneficial.
Yeah.
It is.
So hold on though, because what I'm after here is that the cortisol itself is actually it is the hormone. I was going to say hormonal, but the hormone that engages the fight or flight response.
Yes.
And so it actually increases your alertness, your energy, and your ability to act quickly. So there's a level that's actually very, very beneficial for the body when it comes to high pressure situations, right? But too much of it obviously starts going the direction you're talking about.
Well, but the other thing too is that you get used to that level, so you need more.
Yeah. Yes.
So that's
and your body clearly doesn't.
This is the thing. Is that's why I said cortisol.
Body.
Cortisol is a horrible drug.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's what I said. It is a horrible drug to be addicted to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not like other things. Being addicted to dopamine has its limits. I mean, it's really hard to genuinely be addicted to dopamine. I mean, you got to be like superhuman.
Yeah.
Because you got to keep,
keep doing stuff to one up it.
Yeah, you got to keep, in order to keep the dopamine flowing, and so otherwise the dopamine's that's old stuff,
It's like being an adrenaline
So
junkie.
what? Yeah. It's just it's the same idea. You get to a point where it's not even working anymore. But cortisol, when your cortisol levels are raised for a long period of time, then it hurts you.
Yeah.
Whereas your dopamine levels raised for a long period of time, it's not the same thing. You can't keep them going. They eventually come back down again. But cortisol, you can keep it going just by your mind, by getting yourself all spun out.
You get yourself stressed out.
Yeah.
So the way you think literally leads to more stress.
Yes.
Which is very, very fascinating. What's interesting though is if we do some I wasn't going to go fully into the details of like I say biology as if I'm really smart or something like that, but go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's there's a book by a guy Henry Wright called A More Excellent Way. And he has a healing ministry. And so he's like a healing doctor. You know, people come to him with the idea of being healed supernaturally. And so, you know, whether you believe in that or not is immaterial. But the things that he's discovered is the vast majority of the ills of people are because of raised cortisol levels.
Interesting.
You know, that it's very, very, you know, because the people they're not able to get themselves, they can't be healed, you know, because some of this isn't, I mean, it's all natural, and then there's supernatural as well. But for some people, they can't get healed naturally because they've got themselves all jacked up.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the things he talks about so much is the idea of stress and cortisol and the hippocampus and a lot of his deliverance from this is getting them free mentally.
Yeah.
You know, as if he can get them free mentally to where things go back down to a normal level, they can be free from these things, because it's that cycle that has, and so they're really, so it's supernatural, but it's not supernatural. I mean, because it's supernatural from the standpoint of how amazing it is that you can get yourself so worked up, you get yourself sick. You know, that's supernatural. That's not natural.
Yeah.
You know, people would debate that point, but the point that I'm making is the fact that you can get into a cycle to where you can actually, you know, you can destroy yourself mentally is supernatural, because it's not a natural thing. It's not like, you know, getting poisoned or something like that.
Right.
You know, this is a thing that's going on that starts with nothing. You know, it starts with something that's not even, it's an intangible thoughts, you know, and you can get yourself going and you get yourself worked up, and then it feeds off of itself. It's no longer about the thing that triggered that. It just becomes the thing itself, and then you just have this cycle going.
So what's interesting about, you're talking about the bad effects of too much cortisol. Apparently, if you do some research, by the way, like I've actually did a big study on this before, is that women actually struggle having kids with too much cortisol in their bodies. I think it was like barrenness, all that really negatively impacts the body.
Yeah, that's why I say it's a bad drug. Is just from that standpoint. Is just that too much of it has lots of negative effects. Not just, you know, you just bring it back down and then everything's great.
Right.
It's not.
So if you have also too little cortisol, your body actually reacts very similarly as it does to too much, which is very interesting, because your body actually has like, similarly, it affects your blood pressure.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know how similar, because if you don't have enough, then you don't have any painkiller. So I don't know how that would work exactly.
Right. So you actually, your ability to handle, your ability to handle and respond to high pressure situations goes down, obviously. And so we're talking about you know, irregular issues in the body, but thinking about,
I don't know if I would say do the same thing.
No,
but it's
similar.
It's also
like high blood
it's
pressure.
Also bad.
Too much is high blood pressure. Not enough actually leads to low blood pressure.
That's what I mean.
And
so
all
it's
the effects that trickle down from that. Yeah. So they're similars. I mean, the body responds negatively with either too much or too little. That's kind of my point.
Yeah.
And so, not going too much into that detail of it, and we're at 7:48 now. And by the way, if you have off-topic questions, we like to open it up at the end for that. And so you can put those questions in now, and then we will answer the questions that get answered at the end. I usually start the podcast with a scripture, and some kind of reference in the Bible that talks specifically about this. And there are a lot of examples I could have used scripturally, but one that was kind of intriguing to me, just thinking about with the direction we've gone specifically as well, is in 2 Corinthians 12:9 through 10. And this is what I was going to ask. The question I'm going to ask in this is, is there any kind of unique advantage in the scripture? I think there is, that I'll read here, but to being a Christian when it comes to stress and being a non-Christian or non-believer, what are the differences between the two? Advantage, disadvantage, the same? What is it?
Well, that's I like many of the topics that we pick on a podcast, the idea you always have to qualify that idea of Christian, non-Christian, to somebody who has a relationship with Jesus, somebody who doesn't, I would say, is a better way of of dealing with that, because the Bible says cast your cares on him for he cares for you. And so you can be a quote Christian and not do that.
Right. Yeah.
So and then now you're in the same category as a non-Christian, because
So
you're
now we're
just not
talking
doing
about
it.
that there is a way. What you're saying then is there is a way to I don't know, trigger is the right word, but engage in that kind of relationship with God where.
Yeah, but the idea being that the advantage of being in a personal relationship with God is there are solutions,
Okay.
that are based on relationship, casting your cares upon Him. So the great thing I enjoy and have enjoyed for many years of my life as a Christian in the true sense of the term is the idea that the things that hit my life that would normally bring stress because I have no means of addressing these issues, I always now have a means of addressing every issue. There always is, because the things that cannot be addressed by myself, they can be addressed between me and God, and it doesn't matter what it is. So to use an example of finances, for example, is that for many years of my life, finances was a thing of abundance. It was in abundance. There was always an abundance because I was able to do my own fundraising, to put it for myself, for my own self personally. I could work, and I had skills that enabled me to do well financially. And so I could handle, financial situations pretty well because I didn't have to rely on anything. But there have been times where that changes, and now I don't have the resources available that I had before, because I'm I'm full-time as pastor, and so I'm not working anymore, so I can't just go out and get a bunch of odd jobs, tech jobs, and make a bunch of money and get through. My son-in-law, Anthony, he's starting to do that now, where he can literally go out and bid a job and make $30,000 on the job, and I don't know how much of that he's able to bring home. Let's say 15, even if he's able to bring home $15,000, that's a pretty good chunk, and then he can either work or not work, so that can either be extra or it can be live off, and I used to function like that, where now I'm not doing that kind of a thing anymore. So the issue really at this point now is casting my cares on Jesus. So, okay, Lord, you know my financial situation, and how can this be handled? And then there will be, God will provide opportunities, that cover those financial needs. And so it's not a thing of, and it's interesting. It's been all over the table with the different kinds of ways that God has provided. And when we first came to the Bay Area, and all of a sudden I'm whacked with super high price of everything, and I don't have a job to start with. And my wife and I joked about it being the ravens, because there wasn't as much money coming in from the church, but there were people. We would just literally get checks from people who knew of our church, and would just send checks, and they're coming from nowhere. And we called them the ravens, taking from the Old Testament of Elijah being fed by the ravens. Mm-hmm. And it was like that, and then there were other times that were, different situations, different ways of dealing with these expenses, and Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides, and so I can trust in that, but for people who don't have a God, Jehovah Jireh, in their life that is able, they may believe in God, they may believe in a God, but that God is not a provider in the true sense of the term. They've not seen that provision. They don't have that to rely on. Well, now your stress level, it goes up, because you can't, God's going to take care of this. This is in God's hands. He can do this, and live there, And that doesn't mean, being, Paul talks about being abased and abounding, and it's not fun being abased, but being abased, learning how to get through a lean season in your life, is not, it doesn't, it doesn't have to be, this dramatic experience. It doesn't have to be something that just is, causes you to, be frustrated and stressed out, over. It's just, you just do what you've got to do, and just deal with it. I when I was in Gibraltar, we didn't have a lot of money for things, and so I had to. A lot of it was manual labor, and so I was like, I don't have a lot of money, but I can work, and so it was manual labor. I would do things that we could pay people to do. I would do them myself. We built walls, I learned how to lay carpet. Never laid carpet, but I met somebody, who happened to be a carpet layer, and he did it for a living, and was coming to our church, and he said, I'll show you how to do it. He said, I'll come in, we'll do it together, and I'll show you. You want me to do it, and then you'll be able to do it yourself. And so that's what we did, and I didn't have a lot of money, so we only bought a little bit of a tile mass stake in the carpet. And he's looking at it and go, oh, that's not going to be enough. He says, you're going to need like 15 times more than what you bought. And I'm like, I don't have the budget. And he goes, okay, well, let's see what we can do. And he said, I know what we'll do. He said, we'll just do it. And he had a technique where he just basically put spots of mastic about a foot and a half apart, rather than doing the whole floor. And then we put it down, and it was fine, because we just needed to keep it from shifting. And so, but he was the right place at the right time, the right guy, and then he actually went back to America, and so it was like these moments where we had these helps of God, in our lives, really does relieve a lot of stress, because you don't have to worry. Jesus said, don't worry, and your heavenly Father knows you have need of these things. Don't worry about what you're going to put on, what you're going to eat. These are things that God is familiar with, and he knows that you need them. And again, like I said, you can be a Christian and not do that.
Yeah.
And so you're just the same, hot mess as a non-Christian when it's like that, because you don't have that experience of really, learning how to rely on God's provision and help. And so that's only one area as an example, but that's, that extrapolates into all areas, because finances is always a big issue. It's usually,
definitely.
Finances and
I'm surprised somebody didn't put that down as
a stress. Yeah,
stress source.
Yeah.
It's interesting, actually, because the scripture I was going to use. I'll just read the portion of it, because it's very relevant. It's 2 Corinthians 12. Paul is talking about a thorn that was given to him, a messenger from Satan, and he says it was a thorn in his flesh. Sent to torment me. He said, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, and my power is perfected in weakness. And then Paul says, therefore I will boast all the more gladly in my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest on me. That is why, for the sake of Christ, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, hardships, persecutions, difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Let me ask you just straight out, is that unique to a genuine Christian?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, because Paul's talking about things that he's having to deal with that he doesn't want to and shouldn't have to. Mm-hmm. I like that translation uses the word insults. It's one thing as a Christian to be insulted by non-believers. But what Paul's referring to isn't non-believers.
Yeah.
He's referring to, he's talking to the Corinthian church, and he's already brought up the fact that these people insult him. He's subtly mentioned that through 1st and 2nd Corinthians, his problems, because they say, she's not that great of a preacher and stuff like that, and So he's having to deal with these issues, even though he was the one who pioneered that church. It's like, it's ironic, to me in Christianity. To not believe that Christianity is not genuine, and that there's not a God behind Christianity, is, to me, that's to believe that is evidence that you have never actually seriously investigated the claims of the Bible. You've never actually read them, understood the dynamics of things, compared it to life today, and to realize that there are things that happen in this life that nobody talks about outside of the Bible. That they just don't understand that there are life dynamics, outside that are mentioned in the Bible, but that nobody mentions anywhere else. They're not topics that are ever discussed outside of Christianity, and yet they're true. They're truisms. They're not even just things that, oh yeah, as a Christian this can happen to you, maybe not. No, as a Christian this will happen to you at some point in some way, because it's the reality. Or even just as a person, things are going to happen to you, and they're going to happen, and you're not going to avoid it. But when you understand how the Bible has already prepared me for this, and has already, say, hey, be careful with this, and how to respond. The whole idea of turning the other cheek, which is something that's just not at all taught anywhere else. But the whole necessity of being able to do that, being able to have the ability to turn the other cheek, because there are going to be times where that is the only solution to the problem. Not like when you're younger and your mom says ignore them and they will go away. My experience with bullies was that ignore them and they beat you up more, not go away. But there are times where offering, okay, fine, turn the other cheek, that whole concept, that whole idea of, okay, you can treat me this way, but I'm not going to change my attitude towards you. That's something that is sometimes the only solution for situations, relational situations that are just not working. Sometimes it's the only way, is that you don't change. I even as a Christian, there are people that I know who have decided they don't like me, and that's all there is to it, and they're never going to like me, and there's no solution to that except to keep liking them. To turn the other cheek. No, don't worry. I'm not worried about what you say about me. I'm not worried about what you think about me. It doesn't affect me, but I'm not going to allow that to change how I feel about you. And again, so there's another element of, where a source of stress that, people who don't like you, and you don't know why, so, well, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter why, and it doesn't matter that they don't like you, because there's a solution. And that solution is I'm going to continue to like them, and not allow how they are behaving to affect how I'm going to behave. And that's a powerful thing, and we say it that way, but but the generally speaking, and you'll read books that talk about this kind of a thing, but the reality of actually being able to turn the other cheek, because Jesus says, offer them the other cheek. So it's not just, let them beat you, it's literally when they beat you, turning around and going, okay, you didn't get me here yet. Do you want to have a go at this? And it's like, the idea is being able to maintain a vulnerability, with people who are already abusive towards you, which is that's an absolute no. You don't do that. No, you do not ever in any way, shape, or form, allow yourself to be vulnerable to somebody that takes advantage of your vulnerabilities. You have to stop that. And that's true even as a Christian, up to the point that can you actually be like Jesus all the way? Because that's where you're going to find the solution. Not going part way, because in part way you're just going to get yourself beat up and then be resentful, but you've got to be committed to it. You've got to be committed to the point where you say, no, I'm not changing, because no matter what happens, I'm not changing. And that's something happens that doesn't normally happen in life between you and that individual. But it's a difficult place to be. I've been there, and I've seen it work. I've seen what happens, and it's amazing to see how effective it is, when you allow yourself to remain vulnerable before somebody. But again, I don't want to go too far in the wrong direction there. But that idea of dealing with stress,
I think that's pretty relevant though, because you're
well, it's
talking about
relevant
the
to dealing with
response.
stress.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's the thing is that but you have to be prepared to go the full direction. And that's why I said about relationship, why it's important to a relationship with Jesus. Because if you don't believe this, if you don't really genuinely believe this, then you're going to get to the end of yourself.
Yeah.
And there's not going to be anything left over, where you have to get to you have to get beyond the end of yourself to where Jesus is involved.
Yeah.
So that's important.
Well, hopefully that's enticing, because honestly, that's the experience of that has been.
Yeah, well, there's
crazy.
that's the key. I would make the comparison to the phenomena of second wind. You can be beating yourself senselessly in some activity, and then all of a sudden you're not, you've got what we call a second wind, and you're like you're in endurance racing or something like that, and then all of a sudden you're like, I can do this. If you keep going, then you get to that point to where it goes back to endurance again. But there is that point where you just feel the wind at your back, and you think, I can do this, and then it's a very interesting phenomena that you can be, no, I can't. If you just push past that, then I can, and then you start to come back up again. And like I said, if you do that, if you carry on too long, then that begins to fade again. But that idea, and God is there, like that is that you when you come to the end of yourself and you just hang on, a little bit longer, and then all of a sudden the God part comes in, and now you can do this.
Yeah.
And so
that's what he's talking
that's
about.
A great,
My grace is sufficient.
Yeah. That's the place where you want to come to.
Yeah.
Is to have that kind of grace in your life where God is, it's because the word grace, the true meaning of the word grace is the idea of divine enablement. It's not, It has nothing to do, it's funny, the idea of grace has nothing to do with God forgiving us. That's not you miss it. By grace you are saved has nothing to do with God forgiving us. It's in the context of God forgiving us, but that's not the cause of God's forgiveness, because He's so full of grace. Because the idea, this unmerited favor, is the way that people say it, is unmerited favor, that we get what we don't deserve, and there is a truth to that. But the true power of grace, which is what Paul talks about in that scripture, the true power of grace is a divine enablement that comes. It's not just that there's a favor. It's what that favor can do that's important. What that favor can achieve within you is the issue, not just simply, I'm forgiven because God's so gracious. I saw a quick clip. I know we're over time, but I saw this quick clip. This guy, I've been kind of watching him off and on because I'm trying to get a feel from where he's at. He's obviously trying to make money off of trying to stay close to being, to being interested in becoming a Christian, but he's an atheist. It's quite clear he's an atheist, and he's just looking to have arguments with Christians. But he makes it sound like he's like almost there, and just if somebody gives me the right answers. And it's just talking about, some of these kinds of issues. I mean, talking about why is it that on your death is the end of God's grace? And it's like the death is not the end of God's grace by any stretch of the imagination. Death is the end of the opportunity to turn from sin and repent. But it's not the end of God's grace. God's grace will be with us for all eternity because it's a divine enablement. We're still going to be divinely enabled, and we're still going to have an unmerited favor. We're going to be able to do things that we don't deserve to be able to do. That's still going to carry on. It's not like the time limit's over, and he's using these fabricated ideas and thoughts, having to do with, so, well, if I was going to next week, if I was going to repent and give my life to Jesus, but somebody killed me the week before, I'm going to hell. Is that really fair? And it's like, well, that's not a realistic scenario. That's not going to happen. If you are going to repent, then God is going to give you space to repent. Simple. The idea that you were going to repent, but somehow life had another idea, that overrode God. It's just silly. Just silly. Well, if you next week were going to repent, then you will be alive next week. It's as simple as that. No, but what if somebody killed me? Somebody wouldn't kill you. Let's just stop that right now. Because the truth of the matter is, if you're going to, God's not willing that any should perish.
Yeah.
But that all should repent. God would intervene and keep you from being killed if you were actually going to respond in a week and get right. So the whole idea is ludicrous. It's a carnal mind trying to understand God.
Yeah.
And it's just coming up with silly ideas. But so God's grace, that divine enablement, it only comes under stress.
Yeah.
It only comes when there's stress. Why was Paul saying, take this away? Because he's under the stress of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Say, take this away. No. I've got something else that I'm going to give you instead. And that's going to deal with the stress.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. That's it for tonight. We appreciate everybody that joined tonight. And if you're joining after the fact, thanks for, taking the time to watch the podcast. I know, timing can be different. We get some viewers from the other side of the country and stuff like that in the Midwest. And so we understand some limitations, but we do encourage you to join us again next week. We'll be live at 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, and we do always have the opportunity for folks to answer or ask questions, and sometimes answer questions. But we also are here. We are a church. Hopefully that's nothing that was hidden, and that's not a surprise to you. But you can check us out on our YouTube page. There's plenty of resources there. We record all our record and save all our podcasts and sermons, and so we encourage you to take a look there. And if you have any questions, there's contact info we'll put on the screen, and as always, we invite folks to come and be a part of one of our services every Wednesday night, Sunday morning, Sunday evening. We have church service here at the building. Again, the info will be on your screen in just a second. Otherwise, we will be here again next week, and we hope you can join us.